Welcome to a new deep dive. You sent us source material describing a scene in downtown Los Angeles over several nights that was just incredibly intense.
Yeah, it really paints a vivid picture. Protests filling the streets, law enforcement heavily present.
And eventually even troops arriving. It's quite something.
It really is. And what's striking, based on the article you shared, is just how quickly events unfolded and the level of tension the reporting captures.
Exactly. So our focus for this deep dive is unpacking exactly that scene, drawing directly from that CBS LA article you provided, updated on June 11th, 2025.
Right.
We're going to guide you through the sequence of events, try to understand the actions taken by the different authorities involved, and really highlight the significant and often conflicting perspectives presented in this source material.
Yeah, those conflicting views are key here. It's about the immigration operations, the protests that followed, and how officials responded.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Okay, so the source tells us this whole situation sparked, it seems, on Friday. That's when immigration raids took place in multiple locations across Los Angeles.
Right, it mentions specific places.
Yes, specifically the Westlake District, downtown and South LA are called out in the article.
And the reaction the article describes was immediate. Really visceral, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Crowds quickly formed, and it details protesters actively attempting to prevent federal agents from putting people into vans.
So not just watching, they were involved.
Definitely involved. And that direct confrontation led to arrests right away. The reporting says 45 people were arrested just on that first day.
Wow, 45 on day one.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is the source specifically calls out that local union leader David Huerta was among those arrested during those initial operations.
Yeah, that detail kind of gives you a sense of the scope, doesn't it? Who was getting caught up in this from the get-go?
It does, and it didn't stop there, obviously.
No, what's fascinating here is how quickly things escalated beyond that first day. The protests, according to the article, didn't just happen on Friday. They went on for, 5 nights total?
5 nights. And the source makes a point of differentiating some demonstrations stayed peaceful, but it's clear that in certain areas, well, things got chaotic.
Right. Pockets turned chaotic,
Yeah.
leading to documented violence and destruction.
What kind of destruction are we talking about?
Well, the reporting in the article mentions things like graffiti, looting, vandalism, debris left behind, that sort of thing.
The source gives some specific examples, too, that really illustrate that escalation over the weekend. Sunday, for instance.
Ah, yes, Sunday. It describes hundreds of demonstrators converging on the 101 freeway,
Actually blocking traffic.
blocking traffic and clashing directly with the California Highway Patrol, the CHP.
And Sunday also saw that really striking image reported in the source, a group torching several Waymo vehicles, just setting them on fire.
Yeah, that detail really sticks with you, a clear sign of the intensity, I think.
And it wasn't just confined to downtown LA either, right? The article notes Saturday saw clashes elsewhere.
That's right, on Saturday, hundreds of demonstrators also clashed with law enforcement in Paramount and Compton, so it was spreading.
And how did law enforcement respond to this unrest?
Well, the source details officers and eventually troops in riot gear using tactics like tear gas, beanbag rounds, and flashbangs, trying to disperse the crowds.
And this wave of protest wasn't contained just to Los Angeles itself.
No, the source mentions demonstrations popped up in other California cities too, specifically Santa Ana and San Francisco, apparently in response to the LA events.
What happened there?
Well, the article describes Santa Ana on Monday. Over 100 people gathered. It escalated there too, with some throwing fireworks.
Yeah.
And law enforcement responded with smoke-filled canisters and pepper balls. Interestingly, by Tuesday, the protest in Santa Ana was smaller and reported as more peaceful.
Did the police chief comment?
Yeah, the source quotes Santa Ana Police Chief Robert Rodriguez on the Monday situation. He basically said, when a peaceful demonstration escalates into rocks, bottles, mortars, and fireworks being used against public service personnel and property is destroyed, it is no longer a lawful assembly. It is a violation of the law. Pretty direct.
Very direct. And San Francisco.
In San Francisco, the article reports that on Monday night, there were incidents described as vandalism and criminal acts, and those led to arrests there as well. So the tension definitely had ripple effects.
Okay, so this whole chain of events, starting with the ICE operations, moving through these escalating protests, it quickly led to significant official responses.
Right. And this is really where the source material starts to show us those very different perspectives and, the narratives at play.
Let's start with Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass's decision. The article describes her holding a press conference.
Yes, she announced a curfew. specifically for downtown LA.
And her reasoning.
Her stated reasoning, according to the source, was that demonstrations had kept escalating into violence, leading to dozens of arrests and over 20 businesses being looted.
Okay, so a curfew. What were the details?
Pretty specific. 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. starting Tuesday night. And she expected it to last, I think the quote was, several days.
Did she say where exactly?
Yeah, she specified the precise geographic area, a 1 square mile zone downtown, bounded by the 5 freeway, the 110, the 10, and then where the 110 and 5 merge. Very defined.
But what's particularly highlighted in the source is her clarification alongside that announcement.
Right. She really emphasized that this was not a citywide crisis.
Yeah, she said the imagery gave a false impression that it was concentrated just in that 1 square mile downtown.
Exactly. And her perspective on the ultimate cause of the unrest is very clear in the article.
She blamed the federal government.
Pretty much. Bass laid the blame squarely on the federal government's involvement, stating the city was, quote, peaceful before the icy actions kicked things off.
Okay, so that's the mayor's take. Moving up to the state level, Governor Gavin Newsom also weighed in significantly.
He did. The source details his statewide address on Tuesday.
And he had strong words for the president.
Extremely strong criticism of President Trump's actions. He said Trump commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets illegally and for no reason.
Without consulting California leaders, he said.
Right, that was a key point. He emphasized that lack of consultation.
And he certainly didn't hold back in describing Trump's action. The source quotes him calling it a
brazen abuse of power, that's the phrase used. He said it had inflamed a combustible situation.
He also used terms like fanning the flames even harder.
Yeah, and characterized it as authoritarianism, explicitly saying it wasn't law enforcement.
And Newsom's view on the situation before the federal deployment is interesting here.
Yes, that's a key part of his argument in the source. He claimed it was actually winding down and was concentrated in just a few square blocks downtown.
Implying Trump wanted it to escalate.
That's the suggestion presented in the article, yeah. That the intervention was maybe designed to escalate things.
The source also includes the total arrest numbers Newsom cited.
It does. He put the figure at nearly 400 people arrested across the series of demonstrations.
Okay. So that narrative from Newsom contrasts incredibly sharply with President Trump's response and rationale as presented in the same source material.
Night and day, really.
Absolutely. The article notes his direct order. Mr. Trump declared the National Guard would be deployed to Los Angeles.
Right. Doing so despite that public opposition from California politicians we just talked about.
They saw it as unnecessary, but he went ahead.
And he specified the scale of this federal deployment. 2,000 National Guard troops were ordered, plus 700 U.S. Marines.
Marines, too. When did they arrive?
The source notes the Marines arrived on Tuesday morning.
And his perspective, as quoted in the source, is just fundamentally different from his Truth Social post.
Yeah, he called Governor Newsom incompetent. Stated California failed to provide protection when ICE officers, who he called great patriots, were attacked.
By an out-of-control mob.
An out-of-control mob of agitators, troublemakers, and indoor insurrectionists. That was the phrasing. And he finished the post with, "Make America great again."
And then, in his speech at Fort Bragg,
he went further, characterized the protests as a full-blown assault on peace, on public order, and a national sovereignty.
He claimed LA would be burning to the ground without him.
That's what he said, yes.
Yeah.
Burning to the ground right now without his action. He also asserted the demonstrations were by rioters bearing foreign flags with the aim of continuing a foreign invasion.
Wow.
And stated he would liberate Los Angeles, the language used by the different leaders.
Yeah.
It's just incredibly striking when you see it laid out like this in the source.
It really is. And it's clear from the source that California wasn't just responding with words. Attorney General Rob Bonta took legal action.
That's right. Bonta filed a lawsuit on Monday against the Trump administration, specifically naming Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and the DOD.
And the argument was?
The core argument, as described in the source, is that these federal orders are unlawful, that they exceed federal authority under the 10th Amendment, the one dealing with state powers.
And then on Tuesday, they filed something else.
Yes, an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order, a TRO.
Asking a judge to step in immediately.
Exactly. Asking a federal judge to stop any further deployment and use of military and National Guard forces for patrolling or protecting federal officers and facilities in this specific context.
What was Bonta's reasoning for this legal push?
His reasoning, as quoted in the source, was that the deployment was unnecessary and counterproductive. He also called it deeply unfair to the members of the National Guard.
And he stressed it was done against local wishes?
Yes, done over the objections of the governor and local law enforcement. That point was emphasized.
The source also includes statements from other federal officials, like DHS Secretary Kristi Noem.
Yes. Her statement on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. Secretary Noem stated unequivocally that people who lay a hand on law enforcement officers would be prosecuted fully. A clear warning.
And the cost, was there any mention of the cost of all this?
There was. The source mentions Acting Defense Department Controller Bryn McDonnell testified that the deployment cost about $134 million.
$134 million, okay.
Yeah, not insignificant.
The source also brings in another perspective from Democratic California Senator Alex Padilla.
Right, he spoke with CBS News, adding another viewpoint to this very complex picture.
What was his take on the protests?
He offered a kind of balanced view, acknowledged the majority were peaceful, but he made a point of saying he denounces the looting and vandalism that happened after dark.
But what about the cause? Did he align with Bass and Newsom?
Pretty much, yeah. His perspective echoed theirs. He called the situation a crisis of Donald Trump's making. Driven by what he described as the increasingly aggressive and cruel tactics of the immigration enforcement. Tactics, he said, are raking in people who are otherwise innocent.
And his view on deploying troops.
Aligned with the state leaders as well. He called it not necessary here, counterproductive, and something that was actively escalating the situation.
And the source included something about his personal connection.
Yes, which is pretty impactful context for his statements. It notes he grew up in Pacoima, he's the son of Mexican immigrants, and he used to be the LA City Council president.
So deep roots in LA.
Exactly. The article quotes him saying, "Los Angeles is my home." And he explicitly connected the protests to what the immigrant community is fighting for. That personal perspective adds, a significant layer to his political comment.
Definitely. So with all these official responses and these wildly differing perspectives swirling, let's look at how Tuesday night specifically unfolded. This is based on the source material, as Mayor Bass's curfew took effect downtown.
Okay, yeah, the article gives us a recap of Tuesday's events. It notes dozens gathered early in the day, and police were quick to detain people near the Metropolitan Detention Center.
Then what happened?
A small crowd then moved towards the 101 freeway again, and the source points out they briefly got into the lanes using a hole in a fence.
The same way they did on Sunday.
Yeah, the article notes it was the same method. The CHP had to block traffic and ramps again in response.
Did things escalate later in the evening?
Yes. As Tuesday evening went on, around 7:30 p.m., the source reports tensions escalated significantly outside the Edward R. Roybal Federal Building.
What happened there?
Projectiles were hurled towards National Guard troops stationed there, so definite escalation.
And then the curfew hit at 8 p.m.
Right, and the arrival of dozens more LAPD officers prompted many in the crowd to leave the area.
But not everyone left.
According to the reporting, no. Some who tried to stay were arrested, although the article notes the exact number wasn't clear when it was updated. An unclear number, they said.
And the source mentions helicopter observations.
Yeah, CBS News helicopters were watching throughout. And from that vantage point, some remaining smaller groups were seen tagging buildings and metro buses even after the curfew started.
But eventually things calmed down.
It seems so. By 11 p.m., the article says the downtown area had largely cleared out, with most people having left.
So bringing it all together based on this article, you really see that core tension play out.
Absolutely. You have the state and local view strongly articulated by Bass, Newsom, Padilla,
saying the federal immigration actions and the troop deployment were unnecessary, that they just escalated things.
Exactly. And that's put right up against the federal view presented by Trump and Noem.
Saying their actions were absolutely essential to restore order against, well, what they call violent mobs and even an invasion.
Yeah. The source clearly shows these starkly differing characterizations of the protests themselves and the people involved, depending entirely on who's doing the describing. It's really quite something.
That was a deep dive into a very specific, intense moment in Los Angeles in early June 2025, drawn directly from the source material you provided.
Yeah, we've walked through the sequence of events as reported, looked at the differing interpretations of what was actually happening on the ground.
And highlighted those significant disagreements between state and federal leaders on the right response.
It really does highlight how complex these situations get, doesn't it?
Okay.
And how different levels of authority can see the same events, the same people, through fundamentally different lenses.
Using dramatically different language to describe them, too.
Definitely. Which leads to something to think about, pulling directly from those contrasting descriptions we just explored in the source material.
Okay.
Considering the vastly different language used by state and federal leaders,
Yeah.
ranging from descriptions of immigrants being otherwise innocent and the community fighting for home on one side.
Artistic characterizations like agitators, troublemakers, and other insurrectionists and rioters bearing foreign flags, continuing a foreign invasion on the other. What does this tell you about how narratives get shaped during times of public unrest, and maybe about that fundamental tension between state control and federal power when a crisis hits? Something to mull over.